I'll now take this adherent for the meeting of the Executive Committee held on the 21st of September 2022. I can see that Councillor Allison is here, as is Councillor Anderson. Councillor Brown is here, as is Councillor Carmichael. I have apologies from Councillor Chalmers. Councillor Salamati is substituting for Councillor Chalmers, and I see that he is at the meeting. Councillor Clark, I see that you're here, as is Councillor Convery. Councillor Cooper is participating. Councillor Cowan is here. Councillor Devlin is here, as is Councillor Fagan. Councillor Ferguson-Miller is participating, and Councillor Hamilton is here too. I can see that we have Councillor Horsham and Councillor Logan, Councillor Loudon. Councillor Hugh MacDonald is participating remotely, as is Councillor Ian McCallan. I see that we have Councillor McClymont. I have apologies from Councillor Kenny McCreary, and I understand that Councillor Ross Lambie is substituting for him, and I can see that he's participating remotely. I can see that Councillor Leslie MacDonald is here, as is Councillor Mark McGeever. Councillor David McLachlan. Yep, I can see that Councillor McLachlan is participating remotely. Councillor Richard Nelson is here, as is Councillor Mo Razak. Councillor Kirsten Robb is here. I have apologies from Councillor John Ross. Councillor David Shearer, I have apologies from, and I understand that Councillor Bradley is substituting for Councillor Shearer, and I see that he's participating remotely. Councillor Walker is here at the meeting also. So unless I've missed anyone out, there are a number of officers participating at the meeting, and with that, Chair, I'll hand back to you for the business of the meeting. Thank you.
Throughout the period of national mourning, the Council at its public meetings has been observing a minute's silence. There will be a minute's silence at the full Council meeting next week, followed by some remarks of condolences. But as this is the most prominent of the Council's committees, could I ask members, if they are able, to stand now to mark a minute's silence following the death of the Queen. Councillor Nelson.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for recognising Her late Majesty Queen Elizabeth II. And I appreciate that we will be discussing this at the full Council meeting. I think it's pertinent just now to see if it is the views of this administration that one of your councillors, Councillor Martin Lennon, tweeted yesterday that the monarchy is a national disgrace 12 hours after our late Queen Elizabeth II has just been laid to rest. Is that the views of this administration, Chair?
That's not a point of order, and I don't think this is the appropriate time to raise that. Can I come now to item 1, which is declarations of interest? Are there any declarations of interest? There are none. Can I come now to item 2, which is the minutes of the previous meeting? Are there any questions arising from the minutes of the previous meeting? There are none. Can I ask that we agree that the item 2 as a correct record? We're agreed. Can I come now to item 3, which is the first of our monitoring items on the revenue budget, and can I come to Paul Manning to speak to that report?
Okay, thanks, Chair, and good morning, Committee. So this is the Budget Monitoring Report that takes us up to the 12th of August. And Section 4 tells us the position at that date, and it's not that different from where it was when I reported last month. There's a net underspend. The majority of that relates to the delegated IJB budget. And when we look at the council position, there's a small overspend. So that's not too different from where we were last month. You'll remember what I did last month was try and take you through areas of pressure. So there's a reference there to inflationary budget pressures, but also to where we were seeing underspends within the budget. And we spent a bit of time last month talking about employee costs, and it's the same this month. So what I'm saying at the foot of that first page of the report is included within that overall position, there's an underspend in employee costs of £1.9 million. Now that's increased by £400,000, right, in comparison to the report last month. And again, the way we did last month, there's an explanation given there as to why that's arising. Now, what I said we would do last month is analyse this position and report it back to you. So at 433, I'm doing that, and what I'm saying is that there is going to be money left at the year end arising from that underspend in employee costs, and that's likely to be between £500,000 and £600,000. And what I refer to after that is that the proposals contained in the report entitled New Deal for Employees, which is later on in the agenda, will, if approved, reduce that residual underspend by the same amount, between £500,000 and £600,000. So the position across employee costs will continue to be monitored, and I'll update at every meeting on how that's progressing. So again, items are covered in the remainder of the paper as they were last month. We referred to adults and older people and potentially the position there at the end of the year. We also talked through the housing revenue account, and that's shown a break-even position. So on recommendations, you can see them at 2.1, that position on the budget at the 12th of August be noted, and the position on the housing revenue account be noted as well. So thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Can I ask if there are any questions on this item? I have Councillor Ferguson-Miller.
Thanks very much, Chair. My question is on the 1.9 million underspend that's page 17, 4.31. You'll remember at Exec Committee on the 24th of August, which is only 4 weeks ago, I asked a question on the very same item. It was item 3, 4.31. And the underspend at that point was 1.5 million. I had asked if that 1.5 million could be distributed to our lower paid workers, and reminded the Chair of the election leaflet that the Labour group had, a fair deal for key workers, and suggested that this would help deliver on this Labour pledge. In response, the Executive Director responded, at this point, it is premature to begin to allocate this money, and added that it won't go away as a feature and a chance it may increase, and committed to reporting on it throughout the year. So I'm having difficulty trying to understand this paper. Is it 4 weeks on now and that has reduced? Because at the bottom at 9.1 it says there are also emergent underspends, employee costs, which will help offset increasing inflationary pressures. Now, if it was too premature 4 weeks ago to decide what's happening with that money, then all of a sudden it's going to inflationary pressures.
I'll come to Paul to, I think you did pick that up, but I'll come back to Paul.
Okay, thanks, Chair, and thanks, Councillor Ferguson-Miller, for the question. So I do think that we've done what I said we would do last month, which is to continue to monitor this and report back on it. Right, so I've reported back to the next committee. So in 4 weeks, we've got two things that happen. One, time passes, I get another month's worth of data, but it also gives us time to project forward to the end of the year and to look at the pressures that may have to be met from that £1.9 million, right? And when I say 1.9 million, remember, that's the picture at period 4. I've tried to project that to the year end, right, which would be something maybe around £5.5 million. Now, what I've been able to do across the past month is to get a more accurate picture of the pressures that might have to be funded from that. And what I'm comfortable coming back and saying, and I've tried to do it as quickly as I could, right, because of the criticality of these issues to the committee, is that at the end of the year, we're likely to have just upwards of £500,000. So I think that picture is captured in the paper that we've got. Chair, thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other questions?
Chair, I have another question. If that's
Gladys?
okay.
Yeah, Gladys.
My other question is just on page 19, and it's Appendix 1A, and it was just to ask whether the overspends in information technology, the communications and strategy and administration and licensing, if they will even out, because I know what can happen is that costs just don't follow, having to pay out for licenses, etc. It just doesn't pan out within periods. So I'm wondering, will that level out?
Okay, I think I'm going to come to Paul. I think we got that. There was a slight. I think there was somebody was getting a Teams call in the middle of that process. So if I could just ask people to check their devices. Paul, do you want to pick that one up?
Thanks, Chair. In terms of those are the pictures just now, right? And two things will happen, right? There will be movement in that across the year, right? And I would expect part of that to even out. I would expect there, however, right, to be a position where underspends against certain parts of my own resource cross-subsidise overspends within others. That's not unusual. It probably happens most years in most resources. So, again, those two things will play out across the remainder of the year, Councillor. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Paul. Thanks, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Can I ask if there are no more questions? Can ask that we agree the report? Agreed. Can I come now to item 4, which is the capital programme update and budget monitoring, and I come back to Paul Manning.
Right, thanks, Chair. So again, this is to the 12th of August. What we are looking at is a net decrease, right, in the capital programme. So that's described at 4.1. And if you go to the Appendix 1 as well, that goes through the various adjustments that we're proposing to make to the capital programme that lead to that net decrease of just over £1 million. The biggest one that's in there, you can see at the foot of the first page of the appendix, and it refers to the early years facility Clyde Terrace, Bothwell. Now, the point there starts off by making it clear that completion of the new nursery is still anticipated for the new school term commencing in August 2023. It's just that now that the project's commenced on site, it's clearer how we're going to pay money over. So what that means is it's appropriate to move budget from this year into next year. So it's nothing to do with the completion timescales for the facility. It's a financial move. So that's the big thing that's in there. And as I say, that reduces the value of the programme by just over £1 million. On the second page of the paper, do make reference to 3 significant projects that are in there. And I have said, since we started reporting at the beginning of the year, we do need to confirm, right, and work to confirm how much of this is going to be spent this year. Making reference to Larkhall Leisure Centre and at the Community and Enterprise Resources Committee, there was a decision taken that place-based investment fund money of £550,000 be allocated to that project. So you can see that in the appendix as well. We also make reference to the Clyde Bridge project, and there's an update given there on the progress of this. Out to tender, return date of mid-September, which happened last week, and the calculations are being done now, and the various processes gone through that will let us get to the position where a tender award is made, right? And after that, we'll clarify on the profile of the spend. In terms of the period 5 position, you can see there it refers at 4.6 to the amount of money that we've spent to date in comparison to what we would have expected to spend. So we are, broadly speaking, where we would expect to be at this point. Recommendations back at 2.1, I'm asking the committee to note the position and to approve those adjustments to the capital programme that are included at Appendix 1. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Paul. Can I ask if there are any questions? And can I come to Richard Nelson first?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Paul. 4.4, just when you speak about Larkhall Leisure Centre, Paul, and it's good to see we have some extra money put in there, so that's good news. I do note that this has to be spent in this financial year, given that we're nearly halfway through the financial year, and I know David's not here, so I don't expect you to answer fully on this one, but we did meet with David and he gave us a rundown of where we were and the stages that we're at. So my question is are we going through that process at this time, and are we expecting to have that money used up by then? Because I wouldn't like to lose it. So I just want to make sure we're getting bang for the buck, and we are, because we haven't had an update from David since then. So I just need to make sure that I'm feeling comfortable that work is progressing.
Thanks, Councillor Nelson. In terms of the £9.5 million, right? If that doesn't spend this year, it can be slipped into next year. That won't be lost, right? So it's to give comfort around that. In terms of the progress of the other aspects of this, I think I'd maybe hand over to the Chief Executive to give an update.
Chair, thanks, and maybe to pick up Councillor Nelson's point specifically, because before Daniel O left, I'd looked at the ability of Housing and Technical Resources to absorb that expenditure within the current year to ensure that we maximise the place-based investment fund, and the feedback that I got was they were capable of actually taking that full drawdown so we don't lose any money this year as we progress the design forward. So hopefully that's a reassurance. Thanks.
Can I come to Councillor Clark?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. My questions were actually similar to Councillor Nelson's. I was going to ask how confident we were that these adjustments were going to be spent in this financial year, but I think my point's mainly been covered.
Okay, can I come then to Councillor Brown?
It's not so much a question, Chair, it's more a comment. Amongst all these bigger projects, I'd like to just note the work that's been done at Eastfield with the floodlighting for the football facilities there, and also at Hamilton Palace grounds. Football fields and football facilities has been for some time quite a bit of a pressured issue for a number of the local sports clubs, and I'm sure these kind of developments, modest though they are, will be actually very welcome amongst the football clubs in the local areas. Thanks, Chair.
Okay, thanks very much, folks. If there are no more questions, can I ask that we agree the report? Agreed. Okay, can I come now to item 5 on additional funding from the Scottish Government and other external sources, and I'll come back to Paul.
Thanks, Chair. The paper brings to the committee's notice two amounts of money, both going into the revenue budget, both in the current year, and both related to air quality management. So you can see them in the appendix. They come to £347,000, and the paper's looking for noting of those.
Thank you. Are there any questions in this report? I'm not seeing any hands in the room or online, so can I ask that we agree the report? Okay, thank you. We're agreed. Can I come now to item 6, which is recommendations referred to us by the Finance and Corporate Resources Committee. I'm going to ask Geraldine McCann, I think, to speak on that item.
Thank you, Chair. This report brings recommendations from the Finance and Corporate Resources Committee, which was held on the 7th of September earlier this month, to this committee for consideration. And these are the Treasury Management Activity Report for 21-22, including the 21-22 Treasury Management and Prudential Code indicators, and the Council's annual investment report for 21-22 to this Council, to this meeting for endorsement and then onward referral to the Council for approval. The detail of the recommendations are in section 3 of the report. I wasn't going to go through these because most people will know what they are, they've read them, and I'm sure my director will be able to answer any questions that committee may have on that. Okay.
I think there's a new politician in the room. Are there any questions for Paul? I'm not seeing any. Can I ask that we agree the report? Right. Okay. Can I come now to item 7, which is about the secondary school estate and its future capacity, and can I ask Tony McDade to speak to this report?
Thank you, Chair. Good morning. The purpose of the report is to provide an update on the current secondary school pupil forecast numbers and the implications on accommodation requirement for our secondary school estate. You'll see in the background in section 3, this is something that we do on a yearly basis, and we try to monitor the numbers right across the school estate itself, and we do highlight that we have some pressure points, not unsurprisingly to do with some of the expansion and some of the housing developments. Table 1 outlines that expansion process and some of the numbers, and we see that pressure moving from primary into secondary. We try to monitor that. It's not uncommon that we monitor that and we make adaptations as we go, but we have you'll see in Appendix 1 there are 4 secondary schools that have an ongoing issue, and that continues to increase. And that's the reason for the report today, where we highlight the need for some more than a normal adaptation. We would look to do some building works, and we can see that from section 4 itself. There are 4 schools that we highlight. We highlight Calderside Academy, Holy Cross High, St Andrews and St Bride's, and Uddingston Grammar. We show the trend for the schools as well. That's both in the appendix and indeed table 2 itself. And we go through in section 5 what the reasons behind that. Calderside Academy, we do see growth, but in fact it doubles up for us because we also have to take into account children with additional support needs, and that has an ASN base on stream as well. And if you think about it, if we have pupil growth across the school estate, then we will have an increasing number of children with additional support needs. So therefore we need to target that children with additional support needs don't have a designated catchment school if they're in a base. That's done through a placement process. So therefore we believe that we would need to look both Calderside in terms of its numbers and growth, but also in terms of its additional support needs capacity. And what we would be suggesting for Calderside Academy is 8 additional classrooms with a multi-purpose area. That will allow us to have both an increased base capacity and then to cope with the increased numbers. As we move into Holy Cross High School, we also see that they continue to grow in numbers as well. And although we cope with that, there does become a point in which we will look to try to build, we're suggesting a separate teaching block that is close to the existing building. There is no opportunity for catchment realignment, for example, and that would be another way that we would look to try to cope with that type of situation, because we do have St John Ogilvie High School, but again, that would work efficiently, and that works fairly close to its operating capacity as it stands. St Andrews and St Bride's is in a similar position, in which we are looking at higher numbers than the planning capacity, and that's about by 2028, and we try to project the increasing role within there as well. It's a similar picture around a catchment realignment that wouldn't be possible, and we're proposing to create additional classrooms and associated accommodation in a separate building close to the existing building. For Uddingston Grammar, the footprint of the building, the school is slightly different. We're proposing a small extension and to look at some realignment of classes within the school and some areas within the school itself. And we believe that those internal alterations can happen. We would also look, and again we do this, we would look to reduce the number of placing requests. That's something that we do across the school estate when there's significant pressure. And we believe by reducing the number of placing requests and adding an extension to the building itself, we would then be able to cope with the additional numbers that come on. Section 9 outlines, of course, that's not exclusively to 4 schools. We do try to monitor the 20, if we include our ASN schools, on a year-by-year basis. But these are the ones that we are specifically finding there's issues, and we're seeing them on an ongoing basis as well. Section 10 outlines the procurement options, and we did look to review the procurement options, and the best value option for the construction and the expansion is through a partnership approach, and that's within the existing PPP contract. There are some legal and technical costs which will be incorporated with the estimated capital costs. Section 11 outlines the Learning Estate Investment Programme by the Scottish Government. That calls on us to put in a bid for Phase 3. That bid is due for the 31st of October. There's an overall funding package by the Government of £275 million, and you can access up to 50% of the funding if you meet certain criteria. And we do highlight in section 11.2 and in 11.3, we believe that Holy Cross and the St Andrews and St Bride's, because it's 2 standalone blocks, would that would fit the criteria for an application for £7 million of the £14 million. Section 12 outlines the financial implications of the 4 secondary schools, and that's £22.8 million, but that's obviously subject to design and tender as well. We look at the funding streams, we look at City Deal grants and also developer contributions, and an assumption to a certain extent of the Learning Investment Fund by the Scottish Government, and that is shown in Table 3 of the £22.8 million, and then how that is broken down as well. It is noted a couple of risks in there as well. Sometimes the developer contributions will come on stream at different times, so therefore we need to work to try to manage that process. And also there is a risk that the LEAP bid is unsuccessful. If that was the case, we would of course bring it back within the wider context of the Council's capital programme, and that would be in January of 2023. There is a small, as I've highlighted, potential around the timing of developer contributions that's outlined in sections 12.5. But you'll see from table 4 itself the profile of spend against income and the cost of borrowing. In table 4 it does show a minor cost of borrowing based on a profile of expenditure income of about £20,000. There are some revenue implications as well. That would be around cleaning, janitorial and catering costs, and also to the extension to the PPP contract. And that's subject to annual RPI as consistent with the existing contract itself. You will see the summary in Table 5 around some of the costs totalling to £688,000. Table 5, it doesn't include any associated teaching costs, because obviously we would look generally around increased teaching costs of pupils irrespective of where they are as well. So they're not included within the report because we monitor pupil growth and around teacher requirements on a year-by-year basis as well. And that's slightly different for us also. So if I could refer the committee back to the recommendations in section 2.1 to approve the 4 secondary school building work programmes to manage the pupil growth, to note the priority of the 2 Learning Estate Investment Project fund builds, is firstly the secondary school expansion. I will come on to the SEBN paper next as well, and then the note to need to review the financial position in the wider context of the capital programme in 2023 should the LEAP funding bid and City Deal change control procedures be unsuccessful. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. There are a number of questions. Can I come in the first instance to Katie Loudon?
Thanks very much, Chair. Good morning, everyone. I do have a few questions which I'll come to in a minute, but I'd like to say something more general first, please, Chair. We know that we have constrictions because of the PPP contracts and decisions that have been made in the past. In Uddingston Grammar, for example, where young people from my ward are based, we're seeing the consequences of choices that were made previously, a good number of years ago. I still believe that ideally a secondary school should be in the heart of a community, and I still firmly believe that this should always have been the aim in the first place, way back when Newton Farm was at the planning stage more than 15 years ago. In the previous 5 years, I've had many conversations with officers on the basis of conversations that I've had with parent councils, community council and individual families. We are where we are just now, obviously, and I appreciate that this will continue to be closely monitored. Councillor Brogan, who's in the same ward as I am and is part of the administration, had on hundreds of election leaflets earlier this year that he would campaign for a new secondary school and promised to review secondary school provision in his ward. I'm reassured that we're continuing to look at this, and I hope the administration seriously listen to the concerns which are clearly outlined in a future item today about Cambuslang East in particular, and I'm sure Councillor Brogan will relate these to the administration. As I said, I've got a number of questions. Would it help, Chair, if I group them by theme? They're related. Okay. First of all, so according to a recent return to the Scottish Government about building standards, capacity in our council is decided based on what was established by the contractors in the first place. So my first question is, are school management involved in establishing what pressures there are in space, especially non-teaching space, in each of the schools mentioned in section 5 and not just Uddingston? And the second sort of related question, in Uddingston, how much flexibility is actually left within the building, and are we confident it's going to be enough? And talking about non-teaching space as well as teaching space there. And finally, from this section of questions, from a colleague who was asking about St Andrews and St Bride's, what form will the additional building take, and what implications are there for the overall school environment, given that we're currently supporting 150 pupils over capacity? And I'll come back to the other ones, Chair. Thank you.
Okay, thanks for that. I'll come back to you just after, maybe asking Tony to pick up those questions.
Thanks, Councillor Loudon. You're quite right. The school management have been integrally involved in all of the discussions that we've had about how you manage that space, because they do that on a day-to-day basis as well. And I suppose, for reassurance, that does happen. And we do look at schools, even through curriculum, we have to repurpose some of the space. The curriculum does evolve, so therefore you may look at a more technical-based subject, or you may, from a practical perspective, a science classroom, or indeed a classroom space in itself. And administration space is important about trying to manage the day-to-day administration. So school management have been involved in all of the discussions. And very specifically around Uddingston Grammar, we are confident of that. Well, we're going to do some works. The school had suggested some works to a couple of technical classrooms recently, and our home economics classroom. They changed their mind, but we had gone through the process, it was a couple of years ago, of going through the spec and being able to change that. So we do work, and we are familiar with that process, so we're confident that we would look to manage it. There are always a series of compromises in that situation. I think we have to be honest about that as well, if you're trying to utilise the space within the building itself. In terms of St Andrews and St Bride's, the way in which we've looked at it, there will be some teaching block and potentially a practical space as well as you go into the main grounds just on your left-hand side. So we're trying to be sympathetic to the school footprint itself, for the space for the young people, for interval time and lunch time as well, which is round the back of the school. So again, we believe that's a positive thing, and it's a similar design to the design intention for Holy Cross as well. It would double up. There would be, as I say, some general classroom facility, some practical space that could be used for activities potentially. And we've not decided whether there will be technical, home economics, or indeed another practical subject, just to give us some utilise the space. We would do that in conjunction with the school and how the best fit to the timetable is as well. So we do believe that we're able to cope with them, and we do believe that schools are able to manage that on a day-to-day basis.
Do you want to come back to your next?
Thank you very much, Chair. Thanks. Second two questions, last two questions. Thank you for your patience. At 8.2, there's a section that refers to the appropriate management of placing request applications. This is specifically about Uddingston Grammar, particularly those from other councils. I just wondered if we could have a wee bit more detail about what percentage split are we talking about here potentially by the time we reach 2028 between placing requests which are from inside and from out with SLC. Essentially, how do we avoid moving the problem to another of our own schools. And the second and last question was that there will be 9.1. It says there will be some developer contributions available to assist in undertaking physical works to improve capacity if required. There has been some controversy on this in the past. I know certainly some community councils have commented on it. Will this money potentially be leaving individual towns or wards? And this is perhaps for another forum. Could local members be provided, particularly if they've had house building in their area, with an update on where contributions are still expected, where they're still going to come from and what has already been spent? Thank you.
Okay, Tony, do you want to pick up those 2 points?
Thank you. Thanks, Chair. Thanks, Councillor Lynn. A couple of things in terms of the pollution requests themselves. We can get you the breakdown. They do. I've spoken to colleagues in North Lanarkshire as well. Those pollution requests, there is space in their schools because it's placing requests. So there's always places available in the school where the young person is designated to go to as well. The breakdown sits mainly for children in North Lanarkshire, although Uddingston Grammar also take some South Lanarkshire children and some children from Glasgow as well. But we can get you the breakdown and the projection of the breakdown itself. I mean, in terms of developer contributions and possibly as maybe Geraldine did the last time, I'm going to ask Paul in a second. But for us, developer contributions are complicated because they don't always. It depends on the technicality of the discussion and negotiation. They're not specific necessarily to that area. So take meeting additional support needs. We need developer contributions to help support additional support needs because that doesn't lie just within one area. We don't have a designated catchment area for children with additional support needs. So we would need to have as flexible a use of those developer contributions as possible.
Thank you. Can I come now to Councillor Nelson?
Thank you. I don't know if Paul was looking to come in there, Paul, again.
Sorry, Paul, it's the disadvantage in me being behind you. Sorry.
I should have some kind of rear view mirror arrangement going on here. You know, Councillor Nelson, I probably wasn't looking to come in. However, right, in terms of what Tony's saying around developer contribution, right, a lot of this goes back to the point where these are negotiated, right? So if there's development in an area, you know, the education staff are absolutely involved from Tony's team to look at the impact that could have on the school estate. Now, looking behind the level of detail that you've got, coming back to Councillor Loudon's point, there is an attribution of developer contributions to certain schools, right? Because those are the links that were made at the point that the developer contributions were negotiated. So there is a thought process behind this, there's a logic behind it, and we can tie it back to individual developments. Thank you.
Right, thank you. Can I come back to Councillor Nelson?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Paul, for the update and the contributions. It's very helpful. It was more or less, my question was around about 3.1 when you speak about the community growth areas, and Larkhall was mentioned in that community growth area, and we are rapidly expanding Larkhall by building a good number of houses. And it surprised me to see that Larkhall wasn't mentioned in there. I don't have a concern, but if we build the leisure centre where we propose to build the leisure centre, that would then have a knock-on effect to any extension to Larkhall Academy. So my question would be, and a request would be to have a planning capacity for Larkhall, and if I could request to have a view of that going forward, and basically is that being considered and reviewed, that if we do build this leisure centre in the place that it's looking at, it will have a knock-on effect to Larkhall Academy and expanding at that point, so we need to make sure we're in front.
Okay, Tony, can you pick that one up?
Thanks, Councillor Nelson. Of course, we would involve all of the local elected members within that process. We have had a look at Larkhall because the way in which the housing process works for us, we can look and we have a strong view and able to predict reasonably well. However, particularly at secondary school, some young people won't move. Some families will move into a community and not move them because, say they're at a key stage, say they're in third year into fourth year into fifth year, families will keep them at the school they're at, simply around career choice or subject choice. So it becomes quite complicated for us. So we've not seen that level of movement into Larkhall Academy. We have looked at it for the very reasons that you've outlined as well. And of course, we do try to monitor that on a year-by-year basis. We've had discussions with the school. We've had discussions with very close discussions, of course, around the Larkhall Leisure Centre activity as well. So we would obviously involve elected members within that also.
I'll come to Councillor Allison. If you press that. Yeah.
Thanks, Chair. Tony, just a little bit more clarity around the PPIs. You said the secondary schools are all financed through that programme at the moment, yet we're building extensions here. Not through the PPI yet. You say there's going to be an effect on the PPI contract. How is that coming about when it's not part of the PPI? And secondly, I take it that the changes we made, particularly to the Newton Primary area and East Kilbride Thornton Hall, that there is going to be no there's not going to be another paper coming forward shortly regarding the need to extend the primary school provision, because they obviously feed into these schools. And thirdly, I have to have some concerns about recommendation 2, where the Keir building is to be secondary to the mainstream upgrades. The stories you hear about the condition of the Keir building at the moment makes me wonder whether that is the right way forward or not, because they don't have a facility at all, and whereas these others may be tight, they certainly are still of a modern build.
We're going to come to Tony. There is a slight technical issue, as you may have noticed, which is delaying things here, but we will persevere. Can I come to Tony?
Thanks, Councillor Allison. Section 10.1 does say that we will move the partnership approach utilising the PPP contract. It will not sit externally to the PPP contract, so that we be part of it. Given the technical nature, there was an options analysis looking at that. But that's, if you think about it, that's just about life cycle costs as well. So it's not exclusively. So it is part of it is added to the PPP contract itself. So that's the first part to that, and that's what 10.1 is outlining. And you will also see that we outline the profile of spend that would go along with that as well. And we can see that that's from the associated costs in the revenue costs in section 13.3 as well, where we outline the revenue costs that go along with that. In terms of the recommendation 2, it's probably easier when I speak to the paper at Keir. I come back to that. There is a logic to why we believe that the secondary mainstream estate comes first, and that's simply to do with those numbers and the pressure around those numbers. But if it's okay, I'll get into that at the next paper, because there's an explanation that would go along with that too. In terms of the other builds, obviously we have the third paper that I present today is that we will look at changing of catchments. We will utilise our existing school estate. From an East Kilbride perspective, obviously Jackton Primary comes on stream as well, and that does help within the additional building around the Jackton area as well. So there's some additional building. We also look to realign some catchment areas. That's part of our process. That is a management of this that started actually in 2000. I know that we might think that this is just recent to us, but we've been trying to manage this over a 22-year period, and then we're trying to look from that beginning probably into 30 years. So these are 3 and 4 cycles of school generations that we're trying to manage through, and looking at the school estate versus the buildings within our community.
Okay. Can I come now to Councillor Lambie?
Thanks, Chair. So I think we're in a slightly odd position where the council is building extensions to schools which, other buildings which the council don't technically own until the PPP contracts complete. So I guess I'm seeking for some reassurance really that there's a formal license to alter kind of application process between the council and the stakeholders of the PPP estate, and one which is sort of tried and tested and doesn't leave any warranty gaps. So just to give a quick example, so if you have your extension and you knock through the envelope of the PPP building, you're obviously damaging all the waterproofing and the envelope of the building, and will there be a back-to-back warranty agreement between the council and the PPP estate managers that don't leave any scope gaps? Just looking forward ahead that we don't end up walking the council into, excessive liability for the existing stock. Thanks.
Thanks. I'm going to come back to Tony to pick that one up.
Thanks, Councillor Lambie. For your reassurance, in 10.1 we do highlight that there will be some legal and technical costs. That's the reason for talking about that. We also have a strong working relationship with Inspire Ed, which is the board that looks after PPP, that we're part of that discussion. The points highlighted, the ongoing operational activity is important to us, but that's one of the benefits of it being part of the same process. We would see it being part of the whole school. It's not two separate entities, and that's one of the benefits of using this approach.
Thank you. Can I come now to Councillor John Anderson?
Thanks, Chair. I'm just wondering if these construction of these new extensions or standalone buildings, will they be put out for open tender to ensure best value for the taxpayer? Or will the contractors now be able to do it and charge whatever they like? Thanks.
Tony? Or indeed Paul?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. What the paper is mapping out, right, is a situation where effectively the council would manage the build of these. Right, so that will be done through an appropriate tendering process. And I think the reference made to Hub South West potentially being used to do this. Right, so again, there's an open tendering process that can be brought to bear there. This isn't about the PPP contractor doing the build and being able to name their price. We would do that, we would control that, and then it's about the discussions that Tony talked about. Well, that gets adopted within their contract. They're not in the business of building schools anymore, right? But contractually and in terms of running the schools, it is better to have them within that PPP agreement. So we would do the build and then it gets passed over to get included within that contract.
Okay, thank you. Can I come now to Councillor Kirsten Robb?
That was actually a really useful answer there, answered part of my question. What seems like a very long time ago, I read through all the PPP stuff for the initial time, and there was really laudable aims about sustainable construction, but I don't think those were carried through right to the end result, and Architecture and Design Scotland raised similar concerns about that as well. So it's to ask, with just 16 years' time before we need to meet legal targets about being fossil fuel free, are these new builds going to be designed properly so that it be fossil fuel free, maximise renewables to reduce bills and so on, to make sure that we are resilient and future-proof this time around?
I'm looking for Tony, I think, is going to pick that up.
Thanks, Councillor Robb. Obviously, what we try to do in any of these processes is forward look as best we can, so that if there's any change that comes along, that the school, that we're able to deal with that as part of the contract basis as well. So we do try to look at it from that perspective as best a forward look as possible to deal with that.
Yeah, do you want to come back, Councillor Robb?
Yeah, noticed in the next paper, number 8, it does say that the Keir school would be fossil fuel free, so it was just a request, given the council's legal duties in 16 years, that design is laudable aims are carried right through to the construction phase, and that we think about the future, and also reducing council's energy bills by maximising renewables as well. Thank you.
Thanks for that. I think the Chief Executive wanted to come in on that point.
Thanks, Chair. Just a point. We've got a number of extensions here, so they're likely to be extended onto existing systems. So the question, I think, not to put words in your mouth, is when they next come up for their cyclic renewal in terms of the heating system, that would be the time to make a change to a non-fossil fuel type. So just to be clear, so that we manage expectations here, we're predominantly building onto existing buildings. We'll be connecting to existing services and heating systems, so it'll be at the cyclic renewal would be the right time to do that. Thanks.
Okay, and a final question. Can I come now to Margaret Cooper?
I think I've 2 points I would like to make. One probably is just a remark which Tony might want to answer, and the second one is to Paul, I think. I'm surprised in a way that you haven't looked at the capacity of Straven Academy. I know there's pressures every year in regard to placing requests, etc., into Straven Academy, and I don't see that decreasing in the near future. My second point, which I think Paul would answer, would be regarding some time ago we took a budget decision regarding the PPP contract and how we were repaying those funds over a sort of longer period of time. And I wondered whether these new extensions, when incorporated into the contract for PPP, would come to an end at the same time as the predicted ending of the contract that we currently have.
Okay, I might come to Tony in the first instance. Tony.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks, Councillor Cooper. For us, we're quite, in terms of Straven Academy, we believe that the building footprint copes with the children of the catchment area. We do manage that through reduction in placing requests. I'm an advocate of children attending the local school, but I accept that the law allows people where we have space to look for a placing request. We manage that through the reduction of placing requests, so we believe that we can manage the Straven Academy situation through children within their associated primary schools attending their catchment school, and that is the best way that we can manage that.
And Paul, do you want to pick up that other point?
Yep. Thanks, Chair, and thanks, Councillor Cooper. And it's a really good point. And there's two things. So first of all, there is the real world, right? And then secondly, there is the accountancy world, right? So I'll deal with the real world first. So in the real world, right, we've got a deal with this contractor, which runs out round about 2038. So when we get them to include these extensions within the contract, the negotiations that Tony's talked about will mean that this new deal for these new extensions will be coterminous with the wider deal that we've got. There wouldn't be any point in us taking ownership of the main school only to have an extension that's still running in a deal for a longer period. So that bit's okay, and that will be handled. Now, if I can get you to step into the accountancy world, we won't change the relationship at all with that contractor. We'll keep paying them money, right? But what we get to do in the books and scoring against our council tax account, right, which is a real thing, is we get to spread the cost over a longer period of time. So there's two distinct things going on there. But that second one, I do need to come back at some point, and I come back in the paper later on the agenda and look for the Executive Committee and the Council to take a view on that. Guidance is actually now being published on that, and we've started to go through it, and I'm in a position to start bringing that back to committee. So thanks, Councillor Cooper. Thanks, Chair.
Thanks, Chair.
Okay, thank you, everybody. There are no more questions. Can I ask that we agree the report? We're agreed. Can I come now to item 8, which is a proposal for a new social, emotional and behavioural needs secondary school. It's the Keir School. And can I come back to Tony McDade to speak to that report?
Thank you, Chair. The purpose of the report is to provide information relating to a proposal for a new SEBN school replacing our current Keir school. You will see the background in section 3. We do highlight that we had a significant investment, as everyone knows, that we're very proud of. And that does include our additional support needs sector as well. We give some background to Keir campus as well and the current facility and how we've managed to come to use it. That it was a temporary decant facility. It is a 3-storey modular building and as such does serve a purpose. I think in reality, though, for our children with social and emotional behaviour needs, what we do find there is a increasing number of children that we're dealing with at school level. And you can see in section 3.4 that what we manage is we manage that at locality level. Schools will manage it. It's a stage 1 and stage 2 process of staged intervention. We manage that at a base level across our localities rather than moving children away from the schools and our communities. And then also for our children that are struggling in that environment, we then move to a stage 3 process, which is Keir campus in Blantyre as well. What we've found is that there is an increasing need to look at adapting to an individual young person's curricular needs and trying to meet those curricular needs. And we find the building limiting, significantly limiting, in fact, as you will see as part of that process. We also have young people who don't cope in a Keir campus environment, moving to a stage 4 environment. What that means is that they move out with the local authority to try to look at a very bespoke programme for those young people as well. We do believe that building itself isn't ideally suited to those children and young people. It does serve a purpose and they do cope on a day-to-day basis, but it is limiting. And I think we have to be realistic about that as well, which is why we present today's paper. And we can see some of the limitations and challenges about soundproofing or the multi-storey nature or indeed some of the internal accommodation. We're not able to use the flexibility that we have in some of our high schools and move some of the classrooms around. We don't get that capacity in the current campus itself. So we then carried out an options appraisal. Would we keep the status quo, improve the fabric of the existing building, acquire another building, or design and build a new Keir secondary school suitable for young people? And we believe we have, as you can see, we're opting for 5.4. And the reason for that is twofold. We do believe that bespoke facility can not only look after the needs of those young people, but we believe potentially for young people in stage 4 intervention out with the authority, there might be less of a need for us to look at that option, and we can look towards keeping those young people within our own local authority itself. In section 6, we outlined the proposal and some of the areas that we had looked at for the facility. We looked at 6 areas, and you'll see them listed. There were some requirements within that. Of course, that was about site size, and was it a site we previously built on? Was it council owned? Did it have access to rurality, a rural setting potentially as well? Could it be flexible and meet any ongoing needs as well? These were some of the considerations. Accessibility, of course, as well. What we've then said in section 2 is that our options appraisal would have said that the Union Street site and Stonehouse is our preferred option. However, we would need to be clear that that's about a statutory consultation would be required in order for us to do that. Again, that's because there's no specific catchment for children with additional support needs. That would be a consultation right across the council area itself. And that would depend, and this gets into your point in a second, Councillor Larson, about the statutory consultation around LEAP funding. We looked at the feasibility study, and section 7 outlines some of the features we would look at within the school itself and how we would manage within the curriculum and indeed the kind of environment that we would look for in the new build itself, with a specific view to vocational activity, trying to make sure that those children and young people that are most vulnerable have a career destination in mind as they move as well. We can see that the financial implications are potentially around 14 million and that we would put in to the government's Learning Estate programme. We do believe that it would fit for 50% if we put within that. But as noted in the previous paper, the reason that we have said that the mainstream school building isn't prioritising over those children and young people is the fact that some of we've gone with the 4 schools because they will reach a tipping point around numbers. We currently can cope with the children that are in the Keir campus building with the limitations that it has. We wouldn't be coming with a proposal for a new build if we didn't think we needed it, but at the same time we can still cope if that LEAP funding was unsuccessful. So that's why we have the logic of the priority that goes along with it. And in Table 1, in Section 9.3, you will see that that's broken down as well. There is again the breakdown and use of some community growth funding, and you can see in section 9.6 the profile of spend, and it shows the cost of borrowing would be £350,000, and that would be updated once those sources of funding are considered as well. There's no additional revenue funding because obviously we have an existing Keir campus in place as well, and as Councillor Robkin rightly pointed out, we're looking at net zero emissions within and trying to be a sympathetic build. If I could take the committee back to the recommendations, there are 5 recommendations in section 2.1, and I would ask that they were approved. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you for that report. Can I ask if there are any questions on this item? I'm going to come in the first instance to Councillor Cooper.
Thanks, Chair. I would like to say that I fully endorse and support this report that Tony has produced, and I really feel that the approach is a suitable one. He has talked about keeping stage 4 pupils within their local environment, and that's something we've always tried to get to that position. So that's certainly a good move. I think the opportunity here to present a curriculum suitable for young people with social and emotional behavioural difficulties is much better and greater in a distinct environment designed for that purpose. And with the high level of a pupil-teacher ratio, it's much more appropriate than trying to contain some of these young people in an unsuitable secondary school. Now, as a councillor for Stonehouse, and I've sat where Tony's sitting, I know the difficulties of trying to introduce such a resource into a local area. Nobody wants it in their area. They all think it's a good idea, but not for us, thank you. But I see this as a positive step for Stonehouse. Stonehouse is a rural town, small town. It has good links to transport. So for the busing in and out of young people, it's good links to the motorway and other rural routes. I also see it as an opportunity for the community in terms of jobs that might become available, and the enhanced community facility, which the community have been pushing for some time since the Lifestyles was built at the Straven end of the town. This is something that's going to be right in the heart of the town, so it will provide further facilities within a town that has seen quite an increase in house building itself recently. So the allotments, etc., and the outdoor space and the use of the new indoor space is something that would be really attractive to the community there. The success of the Lifestyles was largely, a good part of it was on the basis that there was a lot of discussion with the community council. It's an active community council, and you can have up to 100 people attending it. And the fact that people were able to contribute to the discussion and the design and build of the Lifestyles really sold it into the community. And that's something that I would encourage this project to take on board, that they engage with the community council and that they're able to take on board some of their suggestions and ideas. But I would like to say that I fully support the move, Tony, and I'll certainly be at community councils speaking about it as a positive development for the town of Stonehouse. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that. I'm going to come now to Katie Loudon.
Thanks very much, Chair. I'd start by saying that I agree with very many of Councillor Cooper's comments there. Having visited the current school, I completely agree with the needs for a new facility, and I appreciate all of the work it's taken officers to get to this point and all of the consideration that has taken place over the last couple of years. What's there just now is not fit for purpose, but I would like to note the hard work of the school staff to make the best of what is there just now, including managing to offer incredible outdoor learning experiences in what is a very, very restricted area. I've got a couple of questions on this centering around section 6 on location. Obviously, I appreciate this is a facility which covers all of South Lanarkshire, and the consultation process is going to be so important here, and this is all going to come out in the wash during that, I'm sure. For those of you who don't know, the current campus in Blantyre is very near motorway and bypass links, and therefore very close to some of the major population centres in South Lanarkshire of Rutherglen, Cambuslang and East Kilbride. So my questions are, is the need for SEBN provision in the council roughly equivalent to population spread? And then given the location, central location really, of the current Keir campus, do we foresee any significant transport cost implications associated with this proposal, given that it's out with major population hubs? Thank you.
Tony, do you want to pick those questions up?
Thanks, Councillor Sullivan. Good questions. We spent a long time just looking at a heat map of children and young people and where they've come from traditionally. And of course, they do come from some of our more urban areas because that's where most of our children are. But it's not quite as straightforward. We also have a number of children moving from the Clydesdale area and the rural communities as well. So in actual fact, it balances itself out. There wasn't a great deal of difference between the site in Stonehouse or indeed in a more urban area. So they were fairly confidently able to say at this point in time, looking at the trail of where young people have come from in the past, where they are currently at the moment, and therefore projecting forward, we believe there's actually not a significant difference. And as Councillor Cooper had said as well, there's also some pretty good transport links in via the M74 into it, so it's quite straightforward in order for us to get to normally under normal circumstances.
Thank you very much.
Okay, can I come to Councillor Allison?
First of all, Tony, thanks for that explanation. I think it is very important that these rural areas are able to get the level of service that urban areas can as well, and not everything is placed in the one area. That is often forgotten, and I'm pleased to hear your answer. Want to go back, though, to the position that may or may not arise if we get the LEAP funding. Recommendation 6 says that the project just simply wouldn't go forward at this time, and you may come back with a further review in future years. I would like to see that recommendation changed so that if we are not successful in the LEAP funding, you do come back to the executive then, so that we can then decide on the best way forward, because I don't think it is fully acceptable for these pupils. Basically, we're making them second choice. It's already been said in this meeting that the facilities currently are not fit for purpose. And I think we would then need to have a more fuller discussion as to how we do make facilities fit for purpose.
Right. Tony, do you want to pick that up, and then I'll take another question, and then I'm going to make some remarks of my own, just if that's all right. So, Tony.
Thanks, Councillor Allison. I understand the logic of that. Why would you be going for a new school if that was the case? However, the reality is that we do cope in the environment with the limitations that we have. We do have that. And to be really clear, those children and young people are our first priority. They are our most vulnerable children. But the way in which we try to do that, we do that from a school basis. So that this is about staged intervention. Stage 1 of staged interventions, those children stay in the schools, because that's where we know we've got the best outcomes, where we can. But we recognise that some of the hurdles of their life beat them. Okay, and that's why we then have a stage 2 that might be a base within their locality, and then obviously we move to stage 3. But the school do a good job in dealing with them. I would hate for people to think at this point in time that those children and young people are second to anything. Currently, the Keir campus does a very good job. What we're trying to do is to forward look, and we're trying. But we realise we're in a world in which we have to take a decision around finance, and within that we have a numbers situation that would tip us in 4 of our schools. That's why that was a priority. And then we have a second situation. We would come and re-look at it again, but we have to be realistic if we don't get that LEAP funding. Now, we hope we put in a very strong bid, but again, this is just about trying to be realistic about the expectation as well, which is why the recommendations are, it's recommendation 5 sits the way it does just now.
No. Yeah, sorry, Chairman. I hear what you're saying, Tony, but I think that decision needs to be taken once we know the facts. It may not come to anything, and the LEAP we are successful with, but I don't think we need to take that decision today as this paper is recommending. It's quite simply saying it doesn't go ahead if we're not successful. I think if we're not successful, we then need to sit down and have a discussion. It may end up being that we can't do anything in the immediate future, but only once we know the facts.
Yeah, thanks. I had a hand which is going down, so can I maybe just to pull it together, can I say, first of all, I think this is, for all the reasons that have been set out that I don't need to repeat, I think a very positive paper, and I'm pleased to see the reaction to it today. There are huge pressures on the capital programme, as have been discussed earlier on, but can I just give the assurance from my point of view, and if I can get the agreement of the committee, that if indeed the bids to the Learning Estate Improvement Funds are not successful, that we'll consider this further as a committee, just so it has been outlined. And I think that's the prudent response. So I don't think we're taking a decision to say we won't be doing this today, but we'll review that in light of whatever the outcome of the process is. With that change, can I ask that we agree the report? Thank you very much. And can I now come to item 9, which is the outcome of the consultation on the realignment of the catchment of Newton Farm and Hallside primary schools, and also altering the secondary school pupils in the rezoned area. And can I ask Tony McDade again to speak on that report?
Thank you, Chair. The purpose of the report is to provide information on the outcome of the consultation undertaken on the above proposal and to seek the approval of the Executive Committee to implement the recommendation of the outcome report from the statutory consultation that was undertaken as well. We will see that this is one of the areas of pressure for us, and that was the realignment of Newton Farm and Hallside primary schools. The purpose was to try to balance out the growth within the area itself, and I'll come on to that just in a second, but it is the consequential effect of that will be a rezoning activity for if the children moved into Hallside Primary School, that's rezoned, that's a catchment area to Cathkin High School. We can see in section 3.2 we completed the consultation under the terms of the Schools Consultation Act. In section 4 we highlight the responses. There was a considerable effort to try to engage. And you'll see the numbers of how we notified people through this process as well. And in section 4.2, there were 225 responses. There was also an online petition, but we believe there was duplication in there, and that's not part of the formal process, but we did consider that. And you can see we couldn't establish the nature of the signatories. We couldn't establish whether there was duplication within that process itself. But in section 5, we tried to break down what was said within the responses themselves, and whether there was 28 of them that actually made reference to a high school. This is specifically around the primary school. And if we look at the numbers in the primary school that they're specifically talking about, we have said within the process that the school between Hallside and Newton Farm wouldn't be able to cope if it was simply to Newton Farm itself. There was also concerns about breaking up of the community. We tried to address that within the consultation document. We try to be as sensitive as we can around boundaries, but we understand in any urban boundary there will be a boundary, and that will potentially have an impact with children who are side by side, if you like. We also have children attending St Charles and a denominational school within that community as well for us to consider. There was a question about attending a different primary or secondary for the siblings. In actual fact, that's not the case. If a sibling attends the primary school, there is a right to attend that primary school itself, and indeed into the secondary school. So we've tried to acknowledge in section 8 about the changes that any catchment can have for families, and we have that those younger siblings will be able to enrol in Newton Farm Primary School for that period of time. As we can see, through the formal consultation process with Education Scotland, their opinion, they seek the views of young people, they engage within the consultation activity. In 5.2, they observed that there was a fairly low response rate itself within the nature of the consultation, but they do recognise there was some mixed support for those that took part in the consultation. There were obviously some people who were saying that they would have preferred the current boundaries to be retained. Parents did welcome the opportunity to be part of it. Overall, Education Scotland have said to us there are potential educational benefits, and that's about the realignment and distribution of children and young people. And Chair, if I could bring the committee back to section 2.1 of the recommendations that are outlined in section 1 and section 2, which agrees the realignment of the catchment and then consequently the rezoning that would for those young people to attend Uddingston Grammar and to Cathkin High, but of course the right for those siblings to remain in the current schools of the brothers and sisters that attend it just now. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Tony. Can I ask if there are any questions on this item, and can I come to Councillor Katie Loudon?
Thank you very much, Chair. First of all, thank you to Tony, to Lynn Sherry and everyone else who's been involved in this huge piece of work, and for all the work you've done in terms of keeping local elected members up to date and answering our very many questions through this long process. This is obviously a difficult decision, not without controversy. As you'll see from the full set of papers, it is a controversial topic in this ward. And I really appreciate the sensitivity of the approach that officers have taken here, especially around rights for siblings, which is very important to people. There really isn't a choice to allow Newton Farm Primary to continue as it is, as local members have been told before. Essentially, the formulas didn't work when those new houses were planned way back. I think it was 2006 the first planning applications went in, and the capacity is simply not there in Newton Farm for that whole estate, despite the efforts of education to this point. I won't labour the point from earlier, but it's very clear from this paper that regardless of the matter that's actually in hand, there is a great deal of concern in the ward about secondary school provision, and I hope that the administration takes heed of that. Questions which I've got on this, in section 5.5, could we have a little more detail, please, on the educational benefits mentioned by Education Scotland and the educational benefits in secondary? And my second question, concerns have been raised in Westburn in particular, where there's been a perception that the non-denominational catchment areas have changed a few times. They've experienced some disruption. In the medium term, really I'm asking, is this it? Are we expecting the population to stabilise there and for things to calm down a little in Westburn? Thank you.
Thanks. Can I come to Tony to answer those questions?
Thanks, Councillor Loudon, and also thanks for your comments around the officers. It has been sensitive around the community as well, and we do understand the implications for families. In terms of the direct educational benefits, Education Scotland were quite clear. The greater pressure that is in a building, the less opportunity you have. So you need to use the gym, for example, for lunch. You need to use, if you're having a three-stream class activity, someone's not using the facilities that you already have. You're doubling up your GP rooms and your spaces. So they were clear that we've obviously built the extension, which opened in August time for Newton Farm. So we're able to take the benefit of the extension. We're able to take the benefit of the existing facility. We're also able to take the benefit of Hallside Primary School, which is an excellent primary school that we've refurbed and we've extended on, but sits at just over 250, whereas it can actually take comfortably 450 children. So we believe that the community get the benefit, the children get the benefit of a curriculum and space in both of those buildings. If you only have it in one place, then the obvious downfall is that you're really restricted in what you can do with general spaces. You're restricted in what you can do within your PE, for example. That was a similar logic applied to secondary schools as well. The greater the pressure, the less options you have, and that was the Education Scotland's view. We also take the view that we will try to restrict any of the further consultations. We had a consultation in 2008. That was to create the Newton catchment. It included Cairns. I know that you're very familiar with that as well, around Westburn and West Farm area of Hallside. And in 2012, we had an approval to build Newton Farm in Parkview. So that was, again, an addition to the community. We were able to build another school. And so obviously there's a consultation that goes along with that, although Westburn and West Farm weren't affected at that point as part of the consultation. James Ayton within the area was rezoned at one point in 2012, so that was slightly further along the road as well. And then in 2016, the Greenleys area, and that was from East Kilbride to Cairns, and there was a look at St Cadoc's as well within the change of secondary. So those have been the consultations, but we're very conscious of limiting consultations and any need for future consultations just now.
Okay, I don't see any other hands. Can I ask the committee if we can agree the report? We're agreed. I'm going to pause now, if that's all right, just for a 10-minute break, as we've been going for an hour and 20 minutes now, so we can reconvene at 11:30. Okay, recording again. Okay, folks, can I ask that we move now to reconvene? Right, everybody, can we take our seats now, please? Okay, thank you very much, folks. The next item on the agenda is item 10 on the new deal for employees, and can I ask Kay McVeigh to speak to the report.
Thank you, Chair, and I'm delighted to be bringing this report before the committee. In terms of the report, it is entitled a new deal for employees, and it's very much about providing additional support, recognising the difficult circumstances that our employees are currently in. But it also provides a platform in terms of a modern set of terms and conditions that are attractive, bearing in mind some of the conversations earlier on about recruitment and retention. So it really much brings the Council to the fore in terms of where we are in Scotland. So I was asked to look at a number of areas across our conditions of service, and there were a number of other additional areas that we'd been considering. So in terms of the improvement for employees, these are centred around about improving support in difficult circumstances, but also around improving well-being in general. And we know across Scotland we're facing a difficult set of circumstances, and we can see resilience is low amongst the workforce across Scotland. So I was very much focusing on what we could do round about that. Section 4 and 5 take you through the proposed changes, and I'll take those in turn. So Section 4 is very much around changes which are recommended to support families better, and that's around about paternity leave and support for pregnancy and loss. So in terms of paternity leave, our current situation is that we have 2 weeks paid paternity leave on the birth of a child. And for your information, that's a week at the normal pay for the individual, and the second week is paid under the statutory paternity leave arrangements. So as you see there, that's currently sitting at £156 per week. And it's very much a disincentive to those who perhaps otherwise would wish to take up those leave arrangements. And the proposal here would be to increase our paid paternity leave to 4 weeks to be taken consecutively, and that will allow families more time at what is undoubtedly a very special time in any family set of circumstances, but also a very stressful time for those of us who have been there. There may be some additional costs associated with those additional weeks, in that we may need to backfill in particular areas. That's difficult for us to quantify at this point in time, simply because it's hard to estimate how many would take up the option to have that full period. In terms of support for pregnancy and loss, and this is a very difficult area to talk about, it will affect a lot of families, difficult for the individual and their partners and all those affected. And one of the things that we can do round about there is make it easier for employees to talk about pregnancy loss and get support if they wish to, because everybody is completely different, and for some they will not want to talk about that circumstance at all. The key aim in signing up to the Pregnancy Loss Pledge is that we are showing our commitment as a council to supporting employees through the distress of miscarriage, and providing a supportive work environment so that if people want to talk about it, they can talk about it, and they can get appropriate support across the piece. And in terms of our managers, we'll be very much going through a communication there, encouraging the use of empathy, using our very supportive set of terms and conditions in order to make sure people get the best support that they can through the piece. In terms of policy and guidance, we will of course make adjustments to all our existing policy and guidance to line up with the pledge. In terms of our current time off arrangements, in relation to pregnancy loss, well, they are mainly contained within the pregnancy leave policy, and that's been a little update in terms of language and content. And an improvement also within those maternity leave arrangements would be to introduce a specific section round about neonatal loss, and that again, it's the use of language and also kind of just modernising our approach there. So, as elected members will know, we do encourage managers to support employees in any difficult circumstances or any sensitive situation that they may be experiencing. But what we're going to do here is make sure our guidance is clear with appropriate signposting in place to enable our managers to support their employees confidently. And being part of that pledge, the Pregnancy Loss Pledge, really provides us with a platform to enhance our communication around about this area and strengthen the safe environment that we'd want all employees to feel at the workplace. So in terms of the actual process, that's detailed at 4.3.4, and we can make these adjustments directly into our policy and leave schemes, and the guidance that we create will then provide more understanding. We'll pick good examples to take forward so that individuals understand the kind of support that's there and managers understand the support that they can provide. In terms of the pledge itself, there's an application process to join the pledge through the Miscarriage Association, and the Miscarriage Association itself also provides support and assistance in terms of material, and absolutely we make the best use of that. I talked about our maternity arrangements, and 4.3.5 takes you through additional pregnancy-related improvements that we can make within our current arrangements. So under our special leave arrangements, people can access time off for pregnancy-related appointments, so it's reasonable time off with pay for fertility treatment and antenatal care. And this provision can be extended to the partner of the individual, providing clarity for those employees who can then accompany their partner to these particular appointments. And it can be quite a stressful, quite a traumatic process to go through for the individual. And 4.3.6 takes you through that in terms of fertility treatment in a bit more detail. We are generally very flexible around about these kind of appointments, and I'm aware that we have provided a fair bit of support for employees in that area, but it's really just clarifying that it's there and it's available. And another addition to the maternity scheme would be in relation to neonatal leave, and that's really just reinforcing that point about if you've got a baby that's perhaps had to spend a bit of time in hospital, that those weeks are added on for the individuals who are affected by that. Turning to section 5, which is more generally around about employee well-being. And as I said at the start, across Scotland we can see the workforce in general struggling with their well-being. You know, we've had nearly 3 years worth of pandemic now. There's the cost of living crisis. There's a lot on the go for individuals, and we can see the impact in that in terms of employee resilience and indeed out with the workplace as well. We can also see we've had a workforce challenge, and Paul obviously had a nod to that in his previous paper around about our finances. So we're struggling to recruit and maintain a workforce. On top of all that, we're continuing to see some of the impact of COVID and waves of impact in terms of absence across some of our workforces. And the result of that is every now and again you can have a peak in terms of workload, or there might be some last minute changes for individuals, and all of that adds to stress that people are feeling. So there were 3 distinct areas that we felt we could do more in terms of providing support to the workforce and maybe helping them improve their general resilience. So the first of those is identified at 5.1, and it's a wellbeing day. So there's been I think a couple of councils across Scotland who've given a thank you day, if you like, but we thought we'd take the idea there and enhance it by making it also about encouraging people to take that day as a wellbeing support day for themselves. And frequently, you know, there will be individuals who give a lot of themselves, but as we all know, unless you look after yourself, you can't help others. So this is very much going to be about encouraging people to look after themselves, and we'll wrap around that with activities that people can undertake, some recorded, some suggestions that people can move on to in order to focus on themselves, take them away from their day-to-day activity and focus on their own personal well-being and resilience. this additional day, and this is where I get a bit complicated in this report because there's a bit of an if-then statement in it. So the idea about this day came about before we had the proposal for an additional day's leave in this year's current pay offer, and the status of the pay offer at present is that it's not accepted, and it's also not clear whether that additional day is a day for this year or a day for next year. And in the paper I'm drawing your attention to that and suggesting that if the additional pay offer day applies to this year, we would substitute this wellbeing day and put the same communication round about it, but there would be one additional day rather than 2 additional days. Or conversely, if the day applies to next year in the pay offer, we would have the additional day this year. So there is yet to be clarity round about that. In relation to that position, I have spoken to our trade unions around that, and they, not unreasonably, are suggesting if it applies that they should have 2 days, the day from the pay offer and the day in relation to the additional wellbeing day. So, as I said, they would prefer to have 2, but the paper is suggesting 1 if it's this year. This 5.2 takes you through what I think is quite an important change in terms of individuals and their personal resilience and well-being, and that's about the right to disconnect. It's an idea that first appeared in legislation in France on the back of some reports that came out about the adverse impact of modern technology and people blurring the line between work and home, and there not necessarily being that ability to disconnect between the two, an always-on culture, if you like. The pandemic has probably exacerbated that issue, and at the start of the crisis, people were always on and always available and trying to support folk through the worst of the kind of initial impact of COVID. Employees continue to work remotely, and again, you've got a bit of a danger there in terms of employees blurring the line between their home and work life in a way which we know is not conducive to good mental health and well-being. It's really important that you park work in a place and then move on and have home life in a different place. In addition to that, the public sector pay policy in 2022 asked us as employers to have meaningful discussions with employees about introducing that potential right to disconnect. And the draft policy is attached at Appendix 1, very much kind of just reflecting best practice in this area. But I sincerely believe that will assist our workforce in saying that they can switch off from work and move on to having a more relaxing, hopefully, time at home. But it's a twin benefit in this. Not only is it a benefit to the individual, but it's actually also a benefit to the organisation. In terms of that, employees should feel more rested, more able to cope with the day-to-day activity. It should support improvement in our absence levels, but it also marks us as a modern, forward-thinking organisation which cares about and supports the workforce. And in terms of our recruitment and retention situation, it gives us a real competitive advantage in comparison with other employers. And in a similar vein, 5.3 highlights the exploration of the 4-day working week. Again, it gets a mention in the public sector pay policy, and members might be aware that there are some national pilots on the go in respect to the 4-day working week. They're yet to report, but kind of initial analysis is that they are doing particularly well. These pilots are around the principle of 100% pay with 80% of the time being worked, but maintaining 100% output. And looking at the areas which are piloting this, you can see that there perhaps is the opportunity in those areas to do more, be more productive with your time. But we've got large sections of the workforce who don't have that ability. So in terms of flexible working, members will know we've got, I think, just about every flexible working pattern known across the piece. But those are predominantly focused in office-based or professional type environments. So as an example, a 9-day fortnight is one of our most popular, and that's people working 9 days over the 10 working days that are available in a fortnight. What we don't have is very much in the way of flexible working requests coming from the frontline workforce. And I've given an example in the paper about where this is quite difficult. So if you think about the home carer providing 20 hours of care, 5 days a week, you can't ask the home carer to provide the same amount of care in 4 days and 16 hours. So that the pilots that are operating nationally are not good for that particular situation, and in fact encouraging frontline workforce to cut corners and do more with less days or less hours. It could be quite problematic in some areas where we're thinking very much about health and safety. But it doesn't mean that we throw out the idea. So this paper is encouraging us to have a creative look at that. Now, I might not get requests from individual employees in the front line, but if we're going forward with here's options, here are suggestions that we could take forward, then I think there certainly is a potential for more 4-day working across the working week for the frontline workforce. So again, this will provide us with a workforce that does feel more rested. Certainly, we're in a 4-day week this week, and I've certainly heard from a lot of individuals that they do as a result feel more rested, and there's lots of national research around about that as well. So this is all about that kind of positive impact on the workforce. But as I said previously, it does provide us with a real competitive advantage in terms of recruitment and retention, and we would aim to use that in some of our advertising material in a way to attract some of those professionals back into working in local authorities that we're struggling with at this point in time. In terms of financial implications, then Paul in his presentation earlier did talk about the underspend that's sitting there against employees, and these proposals are not without cost. So, for example, the Wellbeing Day, the cost there would be up to £500,000 on a one-off basis. And what we're suggesting is that we use the underspend in that way to give something back to our workforce. As I said, this does place us at the forefront as a modern employer, and broadly the suggestions within the proposals here are welcomed from our trade unions as representatives of the workforce. So turning back to the recommendations, I'm asking that the changes in terms and conditions at section 4 be approved, that the Council approves the right to disconnect policy for employees, that we agree to sign up to the pregnancy loss pledge, and here's the complicated one, subject to no additional annual leave being granted in 2022 through pay negotiations, a Wellbeing Day be allocated to employees in recognition of the difficult years experienced, and that importantly services together with the workforce explore the benefits and the options available for a 4-day working week. Happy to take any questions. Thank you, Kay. There's a number of questions. Before we come to that, can I just thank our officials and Kay and all the team there in Finance and Corporate for the work that they've put into this paper, to our trade unions actually for the input they've had into this paper. I know that there is consultation that is ongoing. I know it's been challenging in a way because this has happened. This has been developed against the backdrop of an evolving situation around the pay settlement for this year, and or indeed the pay offer for this year, because it's not been settled. But this, I think, reflects the ambition of the new administration to establish ourselves as one of the most progressive employers in Scottish local government. And on that basis, I'm sure the paper will be welcomed across the chamber, and I hope it is. And we'll now come to some questions on the paper itself. Can I come in the first instance to Katie Loudon?
Thank you very much, Chair. My questions relate to section 4.3 on support for pregnancy loss. I absolutely welcome us signing up to the Miscarriage Association's pledge, and I'm really pleased to see this here. Councillor Kalikas and I had actually submitted a motion to the next full council on this very subject, asking if we could sign up to this pledge, which we've now withdrawn on the back of this coming today, and I'd like to thank Kay again for taking the time to discuss this with us. Experiencing pregnancy loss is an incredibly difficult and sensitive time in somebody's life, and it's so important that they know that support is available for them. The main point of difference with what we have and our motion is that our motion made various specific mentions of leave entitlement, and we were looking specifically for assurance that employees would be able to take time off if their partner experienced pregnancy loss. So with that in mind, could Kay tell us a bit more about the guidance that's going to be issued to line managers about taking leave after miscarriage? Is it going to make specific reference to miscarriage, that's pregnancy loss before 24 weeks, and will it make specific reference to leave for partners as well? It would be really helpful to know how these guidelines are going to apply in practice. Thank you, Kay.
Thank you. Can I come to Kay McVeigh?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Councillor Lounded. So we do have managing bereavement in the workplace manager's guidance, and that would be updated on the back of today's paper, very much to add in that element, but also make it clear that support is available for partners and referring managers back to our special leave policy, which again will make that reference as well. The one thing that we do intend to do is bring out some examples. I always think examples are good in order to give employees some idea about expectations, what they should expect, but also for managers, and we'll work those through also with our trade union colleagues. We always do that in relation to the examples that we provide. So bring some situations to life so people know what to expect.
Thank you, and thank you for your understanding in relation to the council meeting next week. Can I come now to Councillor Lindsay Hamilton?
Thanks very much, Chair. And my contribution to this is just to purely welcome the report. I think that this cements the new administration's commitment to being a progressive and inclusive employer, and specifically the amount of points here that will improve our female employees' experience in the workforce is particularly welcome, and I think it does make it a more welcoming place to work at this time. As someone or my husband was lucky enough to have 4 weeks leave when we had our little girl from another local authority, and the difference that made, especially since our little girl was premature, was massive to myself and our family. So that is one particular point that is particularly welcome in this paper. But I do think that again it cements the commitment to equalities and inclusion that this administration is clearly going to take forward in the next 5 years. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Could I come now to Councillor Allison? Alec Allison.
Thanks, Chair. Yes, and I do agree that support the paper as it comes forward. Being able to provide a service for our staff is very, very important in their well-being as well. But part of the same coin is our constituents and the services that they receive. We need to make sure that within this, we're reducing the working week by 20%. My maths are right. I'll let Tony check up on that one. That means 20% less contact time for face-to-face working. It can mean a longer experience or a different experience. For instance, I'll go back to teaching. It means a fifth of the periods the pupils may not get their class teacher. It would need to be someone else if you're reducing it to a 4-day week or hours equivalent. And I think we do need to take a great deal more concern within the paper about how it is going to be delivered so that we are not disproportionately affecting our constituents. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. I'll ask Kay McVeigh to respond to that.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Councillor Allison. I'm not saying anything about Tony's maths ability, but I'm going to point out he was a PE teacher. In relation, I think in terms of the 4-day working week, it's the same number of hours, so there's not actually a reduction in the number of working hours for the individuals. But what you might find is that the pattern is extended over the working day. But actually in the paper, one of the things we talk about is, first of all, is service. So service does need to be met, and a 4-day working week for individuals can be achieved in a variety of ways. So for example, you might in a workforce have 4 longer working days and therefore more service available at the start and the finish of the day for constituents who need a service out with your kind of traditional 9 to 5 time. So there's no reduction in total hours, it's just a different pattern. Chair.
Kay, I don't want to focus too much on education, but the school day is not going to change in length. And there'll be many other occasions where we are accessing services that are time sensitive, etc. And they are not going to be able to do 5 days work in 4 in these services. So how are we going to address that issue? Because it is important that we support, so please don't get me wrong, I'm not suggesting that we're wrong going down this line, but we do need to ensure that our constituents are properly serviced within it.
Can I, before I bring in Kay, I would just remind the committee that we are, right now with this, we are at a very early stage in the development of the 4-day week. There are national pilots that have, I think, still to conclude, and we are looking at areas where this can be implemented without an adverse impact on productivity. So that we're not proposing a blanket approach. We're at a very early stage in the development of options, really, for a 4-day week. But can I bring in Kay to pick that up?
Thank you, Chair. But I was just going to say you expressed that very well. That was the point I was going to come back in with. It is about options and exploration. And as I said, service delivery absolutely is key. That comes first. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Can I come now to Councillor Andrea Cowan?
Thanks, Chair. I would like to make a comment around the Wellbeing Day, which I think is a fantastic idea. My own firm that I work for did something similar, and we had a day out last week at Ayr Races, which was wonderful. And it was a thank you for our work over COVID. My concern, though, is the implication with the pay negotiations that are going on, or the pay offer that's on the table. I feel that every meeting I go to, we talk about staff issues and how difficult it is to attract staff, how difficult it is to retain staff. And obviously this is trying to go some way to address that. However, to say to staff, existing staff, we're going to give you a wellbeing day, but if you accept this pay deal and you take an extra day's holiday, we're going to take that wellbeing day back, or we're not going to get it. And I feel that that's actually detrimental. And we're talking about how staff, to make staff feel good about themselves and to, improve their well-being, as the day suggests. And then just to say, well, actually, no, because you're taking that extra day's holiday, you're not going to get the wellbeing day. And I just think that will have a counterproductive effect on staff. And it's just something that I think should be noted. I think the unions should be consulted again on this point before it's taken forward. Thanks.
I'll pick that up. Just to say, obviously, the paper does set out that we're going to continue to consult with the trade unions. As I say, there is a difficulty around this, in that there were a number of, if I could just bring the committee in and the administration's thinking, there are a number of areas that we were keen to take forward against the backdrop of a pay dispute that actually wasn't just about pay. If you study the pay claim, dealt with paid leave, it dealt with registration fees, which was another area we're keen to see progress on, and that's indeed something that's been overtaken by events. So I appreciate the comment, and I can give the assurance that the consultation with trade unions will continue after this meeting, bearing in mind that the pay offer hasn't, as you rightly observe, hasn't been settled. And as a trade unionist, I will support the democratic rights of the trade unions to make up their own minds about the pay offer. Okay, can I come now to Councillor Margaret Walker?
Thank you, Chair. I would also like to very much welcome this report and in particular, obviously, the very progressive changes in relation to pregnancy loss and fertility leave. I would like to focus on the areas around meetings and disconnect in terms of the major change that's happened by necessity over the last couple of years. You've got so many more people working at home and working online. And I think to some extent because of that, we're kind of sort of following up with the terms and conditions that are pertinent to that. Obviously, in terms of recruitment and attracting staff, it's very, very positive. But it's not just about recruitment, it's about health issues relating to this way of working, which we raised a number of times while in opposition, and that's the negative impact of sitting in one spot from 9 o'clock to sometimes 7, 8 o'clock at night. It has detrimental effects on musculoskeletal problems, on mental health. A lot of people have difficulty coping with it in terms of isolation. And it has a negative impact in terms of not being able to, take breaks. Now, you'd think it would be common sense that you need to take breaks, but I think it's really good that that has now been clarified and contained in the policy, that you are entitled to take a break, you're entitled to your lunch break, and very importantly, as you say, Kate, you're entitled to disconnect. You don't have to, respond to emails at 8, 9 o'clock at night. And I think it's very, very positive that we've now got that contained within the policy, and staff will feel comfortable doing that, particularly younger staff, particularly new people that we're trying to bring into the organisation. One of the other positive aspects of it is that it advocates having team meetings, in-person meetings, for managers to watch out for isolation and mental health issues with staff who may be struggling, and particularly new starts. They need the access to mentoring, the experience of other staff, the support of managers, and that's by necessity. It has been missing, and some people, particularly newer people coming into organisations, have suffered because of that. So I very much welcome that we're now at this stage and we can move forward with this. We can work in partnership with the unions, and we can monitor the impact of what's been happening over the last couple of years. And yes, I do agree that we need to look at imaginative and creative ways for giving this degree of flexibility to frontline staff who quite rightly may feel, OK, we don't have that opportunity, we can't work at home so much, we can't do affordability. I think we need to find ways of being creative, because those are the areas where we desperately need to recruit staff, as everybody in this room knows. So the more we can do to help the frontline staff in that regard, that would be excellent. So with that, as I say, I'll just welcome the report and say it's a very, very positive move for this council. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Can I come now to Robert Brown?
Yes, thanks very much, Chair. Can I also add my support to the paper, which, as you rightly said in introduction, is a significant part of the new administration's policy programme, as it were, going forward. And I think that's absolutely right. I'd like to make a couple of comments, if I may, following on observations made by other people. Alec Allison rightly commented on the services end, if you like. But it seems to me that the answer to that one is really twofold. One is we're suffering high absence rates at the moment because of the aftermath of COVID and some element of stress and burnout that goes with that as well. And the other is the recruitment crisis that is not just unique to us, but is common across the workforce in Scotland generally. Both of these things will be assisted by the measures that are in this paper, and in consequence of that, people who are looking for good council services will, if you like, have an improved experience because of that. So I think it's extremely important we get this end of the thing right, because if people are not happy, they're under stress, they are being pressed for, because there's inadequate number of people to do the job because of absences and recruitment issues, then clearly there's not going to be the service at the end of the day. The other thing is, if I may, is to just echo Margaret Walker's comments, which are not very much on the ball. This whole issue of working at home, I think, has got a lot of implications yet to come out of it, because we don't yet know, if you like, what the long-term implications will be. I know from talking to colleagues, family members and others across the board, that the tendency of having back-to-back meetings, there's no break, you move from one to the other, you don't even walk between meetings, if you like. These sort of things are extremely important. And I think that apart from the actual policy being put in place, I do think there's an issue of continuing to watch for this kind of thing, and in terms of our employer duties, if you like, just to keep an eye on the fact that this is actually happening in practice. I'm very conscious that I send emails at peculiar hours of the day and night sometimes, and I have been privileged to get back, often from senior officers, amongst others, replies in the middle of the evening or late on at night. Now, it applies to senior officers too, and I think I'd urge them maybe just to wait till the next day to give replies to these sort of things. Very, very few things require a reply that's going to take place that particular night, I think, on that sort of thing. So it's across the board. It's not just junior officers, senior officers too. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you very much. I have two more contributions, then I'll bring this to a close. Can I come to Richard Nelson?
Thank you, Chair. Firstly, from a union perspective, I think it's very well written report, and it's great to see some good work done for our employees of the council. My question was round about the Employee Wellbeing Day. Probably better asking the PE teacher this one question, but it was more or less round about, have we looked at how that day will affect the school teachers and obviously our families who rely on their children to be at school, and the effect that that will have on them to have childcare issues, and have we, obviously this needs to be approved here, but are we going to look at a day where the full school establishments will close down for that? Is that another day added on to the school curriculum year?
Any takers? I think Tony McDade's going to answer that one.
Yeah, the PE teacher will take it. Councillor, we have looked at it and discussed it with the unions. The likelihood is we'll take it on an in-service day. And the reason for that is obviously then that's planned for families as well, and that allows them to do that, and that's plugged in during the course of the year as well. We're just finding the appropriate date if it goes ahead.
Okay, and can I come now to Councillor Margaret Cooper?
First of all, Tony, my sympathies lie with you being referred to as a PE teacher and the implication that perhaps you're not capable of other things. I think you and I are both evidence that we can reach greater heights within the education system, and that we don't all need to have a master's degree in physics to be able to do that. I think it was a wee bit of an insult to you, but that's my personal view. I welcome this paper, and I think there's been a huge amount of work has gone into it. And it's a very positive step forward for our staff and our officers. My question is a wee bit selfish, in as much as it's about the effect all of this will have on councillors, because a lot of what Robert Brown spoke about a few minutes ago is absolutely inherent in the working day of councillors. We've seen ourselves sitting through an executive committee or that lasts 4 hours with no lunch break. We've sat through full council meetings that have gone on for 5 hours with few and far between breaks. A lot of what we do is in a similar ilk to officers and to the other staff within the council. And I wondered how the implications of this paper might be rolled out to ensure that councillors have a reasonable working day and a reasonable amount of time allocated between meetings and the other things that are going on for them. I don't know who can answer that. Maybe it's Kay.
I think Kay's going to make an attempt.
Well, yes, so this paper is about employees, but as elected members will know, we also provide supports for elected members too. In terms of the operation of the elected members' working day, I could be cruel at this point, and in a similar vein to Geraldine, pass this question, this difficult question, on to somebody who might be better able to answer how that would be orchestrated within the elected member world.
Geraldine.
Obviously, we can look at how we sort the master diary to try and plan in extra breaks for councillors. However, the master diary is very busy, and we are relying on yourselves in your meetings, perhaps to consider how meetings are run, and perhaps you should be thinking yourselves, you know, about about the questions that are being asked and the necessity of certain questions. Not that it's happened today. But it's in your own hands as well to set your day and plan your day. So, and we're happy to work with you to assist you to do that.
Can I just come back? Cheers.
Yes.
I just wanted to, we're looking at well-being of individuals, and I'm concerned that the well-being of councillors is not catered for. And cater is a word which is quite irrelevant, because the catering system within the council building has, to cut a long story short, gone to pigs and whistles since the pandemic, and there's no longer the provision of catering facilities for councillors downstairs. And when we do have these lengthy 5-hour full council meetings, there's no provision really. The coffee shops have been closed, and the provision upstairs is sadly lacking in what it used to be. And I'm just putting in a plea that some consideration is given to that. I think it's David Booth's area of expertise, and that that whole thing about catering to support people and make sure that their working day is beneficial to everyone. It needs a wee bit sustenance to be able to do that. Thank you, Chair.
Right. Thank you very much. I'm going to move now to the recommendations. A number of points have been made which are noted, and I will endeavour to get through the rest of the agenda quickly. So can I ask that we agree the report? We are agreed. Can I come now to item 11 on the budget strategy and ask Paul Manning to provide his report?
Right. Thanks, Chair. So this, as you say, it's an update in the budget strategy, and every year the budget strategy is an iterative process. I think this year more so, just because of the level of complexity and the level of strain that the system is under. So the paper starts off by referring back to the June committee meeting that we had, right, and we had a report on a budget gap, and that came to £32.5 million. It gets noted at the foot of that page that didn't include any assumption around increasing council tax. So in the second page of the report, this is where you get the meat of the update, and there are two things referred to there which come from the spending review. So the spending review document was published in late May, and there were two things that impact in our budget strategy, and you can see them summarised across that section. In our budget strategy, we had factored in a 1% cut in grant. Now, what the spending review told us was that there would be a flat cash position for local government across that period. Right, so we shouldn't experience that 1% cut. And the other thing that the spending review told us was that there was a national figure of £120 million that was added into the budget for 2022-23. We were told when it was added in, it couldn't be baselined, right? But that's happened through that spending review letter. So those two things improve the position of the budget strategy by £12 million. Now, I'll come back to that right towards the end of the paper. There's another thing, and this is at 5.5. It says the benefit to the budget strategy of £1.4 million. Now, that came out of the 2021-22 year-end position. So if you remember, when we wound up the year-end, I brought a paper that said, you're better off to that extent, put it aside for 23-24. And that the committee agreed to do that. So these things, right, improve our position by £13.5 million. Now, right, at the foot of the page we get to the 2022-23 pay award, and that there is a consequence for the budget strategy of that. And the sections 5.6, 5.7 go through the facts around that. So what you'll remember is the pay award, which isn't yet agreed, right, is framed around a 5% figure. There's also an underpin which guarantees a minimum level of uplift for all employees. And what sections 5.7 and 5.6 go through is how that is being funded. So there was an extra £140 million from the government paying for the underpin. There is an extra £120 million that will come for 2 years as capital money, and then it will get converted in the third to ongoing revenue funding. But there is a cost. There's what equates to 1.5% that has to go in from the council, and that's £5.7 million. So that's what you can see at the top of that page, which is on the third page of your report. So when we take those things into account, and this is the long and the short of this, the update in the position, you can see the table at 5.8. We had this gap of 32.5. If I take that benefit of 12 million, the benefit of 1.4 million, and the fact that we're going to have to find that other 5.7 million pound moving forward, what we're left with is a gap of 24.75 million pounds. Now, there are still things that can be taken into account moving forward, and they get covered at 5.9 and 5.10. So I would remind you, at the moment, this doesn't make any assumption about council tax increase. At 5.10, it talks about service concession. So I tried to give a wee bit of background to that in answer to Councillor Cooper's question earlier on around how this would work with the PPP schools. What is happening, I mentioned this earlier on, we've now got the guidance for that. It's been published, it's been considered by ourselves, and I'll bring the implications back to a future committee. But up to this point, that budget gap doesn't reflect any of that. At the foot of that page, we talk about inflation and other issues. Now, you'll remember from previous papers, that's been a key part in this budget strategy. It makes the system far more strained. And at section 5.11, I'm asking the question, well, what happens next with inflation? Right, and we've had across the period of the late summer increasing expectations around inflation. Now, at this point, I haven't added anything further in, right, around inflation. Part of that I'm explaining at 5.12. There remains a period of 5 months for our big contracts. This is the PPP contract and the waste contract before those increases get finalised. So they get based around the inflation rates as they apply at the start of February next year. So we'll continue to assess the implications of that. We'll monitor the inflation rates and I'll report back to future committees on this. Now, that might include a reassessment of the provision that we make for pay next year as well, in terms of those inflationary pressures. Now, another point that does come into this are the announcements that have started to be made around assistance to households for gas and electricity prices. And I think the Prime Minister noted that that should take points off of the inflation indices moving forward. But to what extent and from what starting point, I don't know. So there remains a lot of uncertainty on that, and I will have to come back and update you further on it. The paper looks ahead to the longer term position. So what you'll see at the rear is an appendix, and it covers up to 2027-28, and it shows budget gaps across that period. And they are significant, right? Again, and I'll come back to this again in the paper, that doesn't include utilisation of benefit, for example, arising from that change in accounting for service concessions. So in terms of the summary of the paper, Chair, what have I told you? Okay, the gap we've moved to £24.7 million from 32.5. There are things that it doesn't include. I've mentioned them. I've clocked the position around inflation. Right, this is still fluid, and I will need to come back and talk to you further on it, and I may need to make further provision within the paper. And in terms of bridging that gap, what that summary finishes off by saying is that as officers, we're looking at a range of options, including further work in service reviews, management and operational savings and income opportunities. And we'll work in those and bring matters which require your own decision back to you. Now, those options may include service concessions and how we deal with them. So in terms of recommendations within the paper, I'm looking for approval of the update, and that's our approval of the update to the financial strategy, and that's acknowledging that budget gap is now at £24.75 million. And I'm also asking the committee to note that longer term outlook and note the next steps that I've described. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. Paul, can I ask if there are any questions on this item? I have Councillor Ferguson Miller.
Thanks very much, Chair. I totally understand the position that we're in and the uncertainty on the budget position for 22-23. I was just wondering if we can expect towards the end of the year a session for elected members on the budget.
I'll answer that one quickly. Yes, we can.
Excellent. Thanks, Chair.
Okay. Could I come to Councillor Preston Rob?
Yep. You've touched on this already a bit, Paul. We talked about public support for private household energy efficiency, but I believe there's possibly some support for public sector energy costs as well. Just wondered if you knew anything about that or whether there was Barnett consequentials via the Scottish Government. That might help the massive increase in energy costs we've seen.
Paul?
Okay, I don't know much about this, and I don't know that many people do. So there were a whole series of announcements that were in progress, right? And for very sad reasons, things never get followed through across the past couple of weeks. And I believe there are going to be announcements today. They're probably happening as we are speaking around this. And what was pointed to in the initial announcement was that there would be support for business, and that would extend to the public sector. But I don't know what, right? So from what I could gather this morning, the support for business may be around a cap on the increase. Part of the issue that the public sector right the way across the UK is going to face is, and I've described this arrangement before, we get together and forward purchase energy. So we're already paying significantly increased prices. And I don't know if there would be an arrangement put in place to give anything back. Right, so I do think something's going to be directed, but I don't know what. Right, which is probably the most unsatisfactory answer. Right, you've had up to this point today. Right, bearing in mind I've still got another paper to present. Right. The other thing you have reminded me of is there are emergency budgets. Which this isn't directly related to your own point, Councillor. There are emergency budgets that are going to take place at a UK level and then at a Scottish Government level. And the chances are, right, that there'll be things coming from those that I need to update you on as well.
Okay, thank you very much. If there are no more questions, can I ask that we agree the recommendations in the report? We're agreed. And can I come now to item 12, which is on cost of living supports, and can I return to Paul Manning to speak to the report?
Right. Thank you, Chair. So the purpose of this, as it says there at the start of the paper, is to give you an overview of the support that's being provided from across the Council to households in South Lanarkshire significantly impacted by the cost of living crisis. So what the paper begins by doing is just by giving a bit of background to where we are right around this. And there's probably none of this that you don't know. It talks about increases in household energy costs. It talks about the fact that the rate of inflation has reached double-digit figures. It talks about the impact that has in prices. It talks about the potential impact that could have on interest rates and the impact that may have on households. The paper acknowledges, right, that there have been supports put in place for households by both governments, and they're covered in sections 3.4. And over the page, it also references the rent freeze that was put in place by the Scottish Government a couple of weeks ago, which applies through to March 2023. At 3.5, I do start to make reference to the new energy price guarantee, right? But that is very recently announced, and we'll get more information on that and how that helps people, I'd imagine, across the coming days and weeks. What these pressures mean is that it's going to lead to an increased number of households experiencing poverty. And that brings me to the point of this paper. What is the Council doing? So this is supposed to be an account of where we are and what we're doing. If nothing else, to raise your own awareness around this. We can't remove fully the financial pressure on households, but there are actions that are being taken and are described in this paper that should provide vital support. So the remainder of the paper goes on to describe these, and it splits them into new supports, right, which apply in 2022-23, and they're covered in section 4, and also how they dovetail with existing supports. That's covered in section 5. Now, some of what's described in here relates to how we're spending money from something that was called the Local Authority COVID Economic Recovery Fund, which was money that we were given back in April. So you'll see these references to the LACER fund. That's what that means. And a lot of what's in here was in that briefing back in April. So what I'll do is I'll quickly go through these two sections, covering off these supports. At section 4, what we're calling this new council support for households, so a financial wellbeing support fund. You get a brief description of that. It's a new fund designed to specifically support households experiencing financial hardship. Payments totalling £250 are made to eligible households with support offered on accessing benefits and further specialist help. Now, that fund is accessed via referrals, and 4.11 and 2 go on to describe how those referrals come through. £1.75 million, £1.720 million has been allocated to provide the funding for that support. The paper then goes on to talk about energy support. So it looks at prepaid meters and support there, and we would look to get voucher payments, £49 per household, and to couple that with advice on energy use, again on a referral basis. You can see how that's we're looking to do that. And at the foot of that page, it talks about capped meters and gives an explanation of what that means. Gas meters are capped is when the annual gas safety check is completed and there isn't any credit in the prepayment meter. It can't be completed and the service is disconnected. So what we'd look to do is provide amounts of money, if nothing else, to prevent that capping happening and households going through the winter with no gas supply because they've been capped. At 4.3, we pick up on an education advice project, refers to 2 family wellbeing assistants. They're in specific schools. It describes the support that they give to families, and it describes at 4.33 the type of support that would be offered where a crisis situation is identified. At 4.4, there are other supports that we pick up. Digital inclusion, right, around looking to target residents in high SIMD areas and get improved Wi-Fi in community facilities rolled out. We talk about lived experience funding at 442. That's something I think that's proved valuable and valued by elected members in terms of the feedback that gives on experiences within communities and funding for that. And at 443, Money Matters, an employability advisor. So this is somebody who would tie directly in with the employability team from Money Matters to help get people back into work and to deal with some of the financial consequences of doing that. So that would be a bespoke service that helps them with benefits, debt and budgeting advice and helps them make that journey back to employment. Now, I said that I would cover in section 5 to give the full or a fuller picture, all the supports. And some of these actually, again, what we're augmenting for 22-23, again, from that LACER funding. So referencing the Money Matters advice service, what that does, it provides residents with free confidential debt, welfare, benefit and tax credit advice. We reference the Scottish Welfare Fund. From that LACER money, we've put an extra £1.345 million in, and that's to try and provide increased capacity in what's likely to be a trying year. And at 5.3, we reference to our colleagues in housing, the supports that are given there, and the additional money that we've put into the Tenancy Sustainment Fund, which has been established by the Housing Service, and that's targeted at tenants in rent arrears to assist them in sustaining their tenancy. And again, a description is given of that. At 5.4, just given the context of the report, it's worth noting the role that this council, as do all councils, have in the benefits system within the country. So you can see in those bullet points at 5.4.1 some significant amounts of money which pass through the council, where the council deals with a client group and tries to make sure these are directed as effectively as possible. So all of those items we pull together in a table that you can see at the end of the paper. Now, section 6 of the paper looks at school meal debt. And at the end of the last financial year, we put money aside to enable school meal debt to be written off. And what this paper describes is the process through which that will be done. Right? And it makes reference to 2 stages. There are, at the end of that paragraph 6.1, amounts and categories that are already identified by colleagues in education, which we can take forward for write-off. And that would be done at the Finance and Corporate Resources Committee in November. And then it looks ahead at work education will do to identify other cases for write-off. Again, that will happen at the November Finance and Corporate Committee for amounts that we can do by that point. But this is going to be a rolling process and it will continue to arise. And amounts identified after that point in time will be taken to the next available committee for write-off. At 6.4, I would ask you to note the approach by colleagues within community and enterprise and education on this. They continue to work jointly on it. They signpost supports that are available to families. And the council continues to provide a school meal for all children who require one, even if they're unable to pay on the day. Now, section 7 of the paper, having gone through all of this, and I referred to the table at the end of the paper, and it's got a figure in it of nearly £92 million. And we also refer there to the new money that's gone into those specific initiatives this year. That package of support may not be enough. Right? It may prove insufficient in the face of likely demand this winter, despite other supports that are put in place by governments. The funding constraints that we're under limit the extent to which we can provide support. If further funding is provided by the government, then more support would be offered by the council. So in terms of recommendations, I'd take you back to the beginning of the paper. And what I'm looking for there at 2.1, the first recommendation, note the range of those supports. Second recommendation is one for approval, that proposed write-off of school meal debt is outlined in section 6 be approved, and that the committee refers that to the Finance and Corporate Committee for consideration for write-off. And thirdly, noting that the council remains prepared to provide further assistance to households should additional resources be provided. So again, Chair, happy to take any questions. A lot of the work has been put together over the period of the past year by Craig Ferguson, who's joined us today, and Craig's here to help me with any questions you may have also. Thanks, Chair.
Okay, thank you, Paul. I have 2 questions. If anyone would like to ask a question, I could ask you to press your button now. Could I come to Councillor Katie Loudon?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Paul, for taking us through that very detailed paper. First of all, I would say I'm fully supportive of recommendation 2 on the write-off of school debt. This conversation has already taken place in another forum. Page 87, section 6.1 reads that the Executive Director of Finance and Corporate Resources was asked by the administration to bring forward proposals to write off school meal debt, and then it mentions it was also discussed at Finance Committee. This matter was raised by me at the Finance and Corporate Resources Committee on the 7th of September, as of course the video record will show. I would like to clarify this, as I had asked if the sundry debt we were being asked to write off at that time included school meal debt, and Craig Ferguson had advised that it didn't. I then asked if the sundry debt write-off could be deferred until the figure from school meal debt was included, and said I wished to look at writing this off. The Director advised that it did not. However, they would work on a proposal and bring this back to Finance in November for consideration. It was not mentioned at this point in committee that the administration had raised this, and the convener made no reference to their apparent plans either, and indeed seemed inclined to accept her amendment before we were offered reassurances that this matter would come back to committee shortly and would be an ongoing process. So my questions, is this therefore a mistake in the paper at section 6.1, since this was raised by the SNP group, or perhaps the wording in section 6.1 is in a slightly misleading order? And for the administration, if this is not a mistake in the paper, is it not a failure in terms of openness and transparency on the part of the administration, not to mention that discussions were already taking place at the time of the Finance Committee and at the time of our amendment? With reference to earlier comments about timing made today and the enthusiastic agreement from some sections of their benches, to be frank, they could have saved themselves some time at that meeting if they had been upfront at that time. Thank you, Chair.
A minute. From my own point of view, just in relation to the administration, the request from us comes in response to a letter from Aberlour, the children's charity, who wrote to all council leaders seeking support for action on school debt, and I believe that school meal debt, and I believe that Paul is still engaging with them. I don't know if there's any other issues arising from that you might want to pick up, Paul, but if not, I'm happy to move to the next question, which is from Councillor Gladys Miller.
Thank you, Chair. This paper gives me a bit of comfort knowing that Scottish local authorities will be doing whatever we can to support people through the winter and the hardships that they're going to face. I just wanted to check on the LACER fund. Is this part of the 80 million from the Scottish Government that was given to local authorities to support local economic recovery and provide additional funding for low-income families? Is it the same fund?
Paul?
Yeah, that's the name of the fund, Councillor Miller, yeah.
Great, thanks. Thanks, Chair.
Okay. If there are no other questions, can I ask that we agree the recommendations in the report? Come to our final item now. Final item is an item for noting. Could I ask Kay McVeigh to speak to this one relatively briefly, if that's all right?
Thank you, Chair, and I can take a hint. But actually, this is a very pleasing report as well in terms of our complaints. This is an annual overview for 21-22. And in terms of the actual content of the report, our performance is good. It's in comparison with an odd year, 2021, so where you can see there have been some slight increases. It'll have been because we've got more services running this year than we had in relation to the previous year. But our performance in terms of meeting the standards in terms of working days in order to respond to stage 1 and stage 2 complaints is excellent, particularly in relation to stage 2. As always, we see complaints as an opportunity to learn, and we share the learning across the piece, and you can see that contained within the content of the report. And I'm really just asking members to note the content. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions in that report? I'm not seeing any questions in that report. If we can agree to note the report. There are no items of urgent business, so can I thank everyone for your attendance today, and I'll bring this meeting to a close.